Oh, howdy all, grab yourselves a beer. It is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today is day 9 of the Heist League spoiler season, and I wanted to talk through some of the changes that have come out. The big news today was the curse skill overhaul, but we'll go through the small things first. So firstly was 2 Divination cards. First up is the Unexpected Prize, which is themed around the ExileCon convention. At least that's the that was the intent of the designer, so that's where the various that's where the flavor text is from. This is a set of 2 for an attribute transforming jewel. These are the things like Fertile Mind that both give you a 16 to 24 boost to a specific stat, and also convert all attributes of a different stat into that stat within their radius. So there are 6 different ones, and for example, one of them will convert all dexterity from passives within its radius to intelligence, and also give you 16 to 24 intelligence. And the other ones are the same thing, just with dexterity and intelligence swapped around or swapped for strength. These are surprisingly good in one narrow niche, and that is attribute stacking builds. Those builds will generally want one of them. They'll only want one of them, but they'll want multiple copies of it. These are also something that I kind of like in a trade league. I'm always happy to see them drop, and I will always identify them, because when you identify them, if they wind up as a 23 or a 24, they're an excellent candidate to smash with a Varlorb. If the Varlorb bricks them, you haven't lost much of value, because these jewels just aren't that expensive in a trade league. But if the Varlorb hits hard, and you get a good implicit on them, then they're going to be absolutely perfect for someone's build. And surprisingly, a number of them have just turned into 4 mod rares, and those 4 mod rares have just seemed to be quite good. So anyway, I've always liked these, and I think that this Divination card will be a lot of fun to turn in early on. Lastly, if you're a solo self-found player, this is really a card for you, because if you've ever wanted to try stat stacking, these jewels are a real pain to acquire, and now you no longer need to worry about them. Additionally, there is one attribute transforming jewel that doesn't fit in with the main 6 of them, and that is the jewel Brawn, which I think is plus percentage to strength, minus a percentage to intelligence, minus a percentage to dexterity. It's not part of a cycle. I think it's its own beast, and I'm assuming that it is also a possibility to get with the Unexpected Prize Divination card. Brawn seems to be the same rarity as the other 6, and so maybe there are 7 possibilities that you can get with this card, and they're all roughly equal rarity. Next up, we have Cursed Words. Someone decided to donate a Divination card design to the game community manager Bex, who has put together this confusing little beast. The thing that may not be immediately apparent is the artwork. Apparently, Bex drew something, and then Sean, who's the GGG employee that does the actual art on the Divination cards, then redrew it. But the key thing with it is this this smoke around here actually spells out the words patch notes when. If you are wondering when the patch notes are coming, they'll probably be on the they'll probably be about 72 hours before league start. Maybe a little bit less than that, maybe closer to 60 or 66 or 60. Next up, we have the Capricious Spiritblade, and the number of times that I have said Capricious Spellblade by mistake when I've been meaning to say this, it's a Capricious Spiritblade. This is a one-handed weapon, and it's one of the new experimental base types, and it has low physical damage, but not egregiously low. It has the highest attacks per second that we've seen on any weapon base, I believe, at 1.6, and as the base. You see 1.89 here because it has 18% increased attack speed as an explicit mod. But the big news is 100% of physical damage from hits with this weapon is converted to a random element. This stat we've also seen on the ultimate quality of Reeve. When it came up there, my thoughts immediately went to the cluster jewel node Sadist, and there's a number of other cluster jewel nodes that can roll on the 10% increased elemental damage large cluster jewels. So these can add all sorts of different things, but another one that's corrosive elements is really powerful, although it's a very rare node. Sadist is of average rarity, But there's also a number of more common, generally good nodes like Prismatic Heart, which grants you 30% increased elemental damage and 10% to all resists, which is just a general high quality node. And there's a number of other ones like it as well. I think that the Capricious Spiritblade is a hard item to use, but a potentially powerful one. The unique item Fate of the Vaal is something I discussed in a previous video when I was talking about sort of forgotten uniques, and also the unique ring, the Taming, which is a very rare but very powerful ring. That's something that people have largely forgotten about, except for use as a leveling item. All of these things can give you global increases to elemental damage. The Sadist Cluster Jewel, all these things that can then scale the damage really well on this. And I think that there is a build waiting to be discovered somewhere that uses a Capricious Spiritblade and makes elemental attacks and scales all three elements equally. It may or may not use elemental equilibrium depending upon the gear that it's using. I think there's something there, but I haven't yet been able to work out what exactly it is. I also haven't decided whether it's the sort of build that would be an elementalist running all three elemental purities, or whether it would be a different class, potentially Assassin if it dodges a nerf bat, and that uses only Herald of Purity instead. None of the elemental heralds. A lot to play around with there, and I think that the best thing about this particular base type isn't necessarily so much its raw power as just how much it is a build enabler. Finally, it comes online at level 50. That appears to be that is a lower bound for the minimum level of the base itself. So if you're going to play around with this, you're going to want to have a plan for before level 50. And finally, how cool is this artwork and the 3D artwork in game? I really like the look of this. So even if it turns out that this is a terrible weapon, this is definitely going to be something that people will skin transfer off, I expect, especially if they're playing a character using the microtransactions from the... I can't remember whether this is the Scientist or the Thaumaturge or the Project. I think it may actually be the Project armor set, but it's either that. It's one of those three, the Scientist, the Thaumaturge, or the Project, that all came out together, that this is going to look cool on those builds. Alright, so let's jump into the question of curses, and just before we do, I want to remind you of two unique items that already exist in the game. These are not new items. Asenath's Gentle Touch is a set of gloves that has a lot of life, a lot of mana, curses enemies with temporal chains on hit, and non-aura curses you inflict are not removed from dying enemies. Enemies near corpses affected by your curses are blinded, and enemies killed near corpses affected by your curses explode, dealing 3% of their life as physical damage. This set of gloves is really strong, and it's just something to keep in mind because it will synergize with curses. Second unique I want to remind you exists is Doryani's Prototype. Like the Asenath's Gentle Touch, this is going to be very rare in the new league because there's just not very many sources of how it can drop. It's something that is a harvest-specific unique, so it will only drop from a few specific sources. It'll be hard to source. But the key thing with it is nearby enemies have lightning resistance equal to yours, and it provides you an alternative way to lightning resistance to mitigate the damage that you take from lightning damage. So, Doryani's Prototype exists and Asenath's Gentle Touch exists. Let's get on to talking about curses. So these are a transformation of how curses work. Curses are being forked into two categories. There will be the hexes, which work like you're familiar with curses, and there'll be marks which are intended only to be used on bosses. This is going to be a massive, massive nerf to existing curse enemies with level 12 Assassin's Mark on hit, Shaper Rings, and things like that. Those are going to lose their existing luster. Whether they become good again or not is another question. But we'll get to that in a sec. So an overview of curses. Firstly, in Path of Exile Heist, we're making some changes to curses to provide incentive to self-cast them. We have made some small changes to existing curse mechanics, actually they're big. We have improved their visuals, and we've added one new curse skill and one new support gem. So curses are among some of the first skills that were added to Path of Exile. Over time we've introduced a number of ways to indirectly apply them, like blasphemy support, which changes a curse into an aura, or adding the ability to apply curses with curse on hit support. Whilst having a number of methods of applying curses is a good thing, there's a lot of automatic cursing going on, and we wanted some incentives for those who wanted to take the time to actually cast a curse manually on a pack of monsters. While we were doing this, it felt like a good opportunity to overhaul and review all the curse gems and see what other improvements could be made. We were going to see if we could add any new curses to the pool, but we found we're pretty happy with the current set. However, this didn't stop us from making other gems that could interact with them in some way. To this end, we've added one new curse skill gem, one new support gem, and reworked a number of curse skills and improved their visuals. Curse types. Curses are now forked between hexes and marks. Hexes are what we're familiar with at the moment. They apply curse debuffs to each enemy in an area. If the spell was self-cast, there's an additional effect now, and that is that the debuff will gain doom over time up to a cap. The effect of the curse is amplified by the amount of doom that it has. So you can think of this, that if you cast Flammability on a pack of monsters, it will start at 100% effect, and then it will gain this new stat called Doom, and that may increase it to maybe to 120%, maybe to 170% of the baseline effect over a period of time. We're going to have to see hard numbers on exactly how much this increases. The curses that are now considered hexes are Flammability, Frostbite, Conductivity, Ally Weakness, Vulnerability, Despair, Temp Chains, Enfeeble, and Punishment. So some of these are skills that, some of these are curses that debuff an enemy's defenses, so that's the various resist debuffers, and Vulnerability and Despair, and others are ones that debuff their offensive skills, Temporal Chains and Enfeeble, and Punishment's being completely overhauled. It's basically, the old punishment is basically being removed and a new punishment is being created. We'll get to that later, but the old punishment will not be missed by anyone. It was a trap for players that didn't understand why it wasn't good. Marks. So the other skills are being transformed into marks. Marks are single target. So marks apply the curse debuff on a single target and cannot be applied to more than one target. We've created new passives which specifically apply to marks and marked enemies. We're aiming to move marks towards being more dexterity aligned as a mechanic, so their passives will be closer to the ranger area of the passive tree. Curses that are being changed into marks are Warlord's Mark, Poacher's Mark, Assassin's Mark, and Sniper's Mark, which is the reworked projectile weakness. So essentially, these are being completely overhauled, and you can think of the old Assassin's Mark, Warlord's Mark, and Poacher's Mark as being removed from the game and replaced by new skills, and projectile weakness as well. A lot of the old synergies with those skills will no longer apply, and so we're going to have to think of new ways to use them. Impending Doom and Doom Blast. Impending Doom is a support gem that can support hexes. When the supported hex expires or is removed in any way, it triggers Doom Blast, which causes a chaos damage explosion. The more doom the supported hex built up before it went boom, the greater the damage the explosion will deal. There are a number of ways to cause the explosion to occur. At its most basic level, you can simply kill a monster with the supported hex. However, there are many other ways you can cause a hex to expire, but that's something we'll let you figure out. Well, one of the key ways that you can cause a hex to expire is by reapplying it to an enemy. So if you've cast Temporal Chains on an enemy, and it's built up a certain amount of doom and you're pretty happy with that doom, then you can cast a new Temporal Chains on that same enemy, and that will cause the original one to expire. Additionally, if you've still got the default curse limit of 1, then you can cause it to expire by casting a different hex on that enemy. So for instance, if you cast Temporal Chains on an enemy and you've still got the curse limit of 1, you could then cast Elemental Weakness on that enemy, and that would cause the Temporal Chains to fall off. If you've increased your curse limit to 2, perhaps through allocating the Whispers of Doom notable on the passive tree, then you could cast a third hex to cause the oldest one to expire. There's a number of other ways as well that will come up, but as I say, we'll let you figure that out. Of note, Impending Doom, we've received a clarification, does not work with Bane very well. Like, they have no real synergy with each other at all. That was a question that a lot of people had previously, and it was something that Groninger Games hadn't decided on. They've decided to go with making it so that they don't really work together. Hexblast. This is why I talked about Doryani's prototype. So the Asenath's Mark gloves I talked about because there's just a reminder that they exist for all this discussion of hexes and curses and marks, but Doryani's prototype I talked about because of Hexblast. So that's Doryani's prototype again. Nearby enemies have lightning resistance equal to yours, and you don't care about your lightning resistance. So this is a new skill gem that calls down a beam of chaos damage on the target. If the target is cursed with a hex, it consumes that hex and causes a shockwave around that enemy. Similar to Impending Doom, the more doom the supported hex had built up, the greater the damage the skill deals. Although Hexblast is a chaos damage spell, it has some elemental themed properties that make it special. For one, the damage it deals has the ability to ignite, shock, or freeze. Note that it says ignite, shock, or freeze, not ignite, shock, and freeze. Secondly, it deals damage based upon the lowest resistance that the enemy has. For example, this lets you use an offensive hex, such as flammability, and still make use of the fire resistance reduction that it provides. So this looks like a really interesting thing. Firstly, it strikes me that this is a chaos damage skill that can critically strike, which is a really small niche in the game at the moment. It's something that there's just not many chaos damage skills that can be scaled through critical strikes. And I'm pretty sure that some people will like to play around with scaling chaos damage through critical strikes. Secondly, ignite, shock, or freeze. I really want to know the mechanics behind this. It may be that if the enemy's lowest resistance is lightning, then it will deal chaos damage that can shock, but that shock damage cannot ignite or freeze. It may be that it's worked out some other way, and it may just be random each time you cast it. So it might be that the first time you cast on an enemy, it's ignited, the second time it freezes, the third time it also chooses freeze, and then the fourth time it chooses to shock. We'll have to play around with this. It may rotate between the three of them. This may even be a typo, and it may have the ability to do all three, although I kind of doubt it, but hey, we'll have to find out. That's the way that Zerfi's Heart works, the unique amulet that has a vaguely similarly worded effect. So, the reason I mentioned Doryani's prototype, though, is that you can make enemies' lightning resistance very low with that. Just wearing Doryani's prototype and not wearing any other lightning resistance gear will cause your personal lightning resistance to fall to negative 60%. At least once you're solidly at endgame. And you're going to be solidly at endgame if you've got a rare unique item that has a minimum level of 67 to equip. So you've definitely killed Katava at this point. So negative 60% is already looking kind of good, but you can stack a lot of sources of negative resistance. And in particular, you can use the gloves you can use a specific set of gloves. And here is the Shackles of the Wretched, in order to cause yourself to suffer the effects of a conductivity and an elemental weakness curse. And by doing so, you can send your lightning resistance down to very, 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 very severely negative numbers. And in doing so, you can then cause all nearby enemies to have a very, 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 very negative lightning resistance, which can then cause this chaos damage hit to do tremendous additional damage. This is something that I would like to potentially build around late in next league. I'm expecting Doryani's prototype to be very, very, very rare, and as a result, this is not something that you'd want to do unless you're comfortable conceivably trading for a 20 or 30 Exalt item in the league that is a build-enabling unique. However, I do think there's a lot of fun that could be had with this. And like I said, I want to try it out. It might be terrible, but it has me intrigued. Next we have Punishment. Punishment is essentially being deleted and replaced by a new skill that has the same name. It's being changed to provide benefit for a greater variety of builds, i.e. it's going from useless for everyone to potentially useful to someone. It no longer causes you to gain bonuses when monsters hit you, but instead curses monsters to take increased damage when they're already at low life. Now, low life means that they have below 35% of their maximum life left. This synergizes with the second effect that punishment also provides, which is to cause monsters to explode, dealing a percentage of your overkill damage to monsters around them. In addition, if cursed monsters hit you, they get debilitated, which slows them and causes them to have deal less damage for a duration. These make it a more useful and more well-rounded curse, which with mostly offensive capabilities as well as a small defensive component to it in case monsters are able to get close to you. I think that the primary use for punishment now is going to be in conjunction with the Blasphemy Aura in order to restrict enemies' movement. In order to not restrict enemies' movement, in order to benefit the most from killing one enemy and causing a chain reaction that causes other ones to explode. So if you're dealing massive individual hits and your enemies are right near you, then you may be able to get a lot of benefit from inflicting punishment on them, potentially from an aura, then just making one massive attack that deals so much more damage than they've got life that it's not funny. And then the overkill damage that you do to the little enemies helps you whittle down the big tanky rares that are sometimes around. The best place for this playstyle will be in the Delve Mines. In the Delve Mines, the discrepancy between the hit points of the weakest monsters and the toughest is as big as it is anywhere in the game. And so if you can find enemies that you can one-shot, and not just one-shot, but deal 10 times their health in damage, then that's going to cause tremendous overkill, which can then help you get down things like the tanky mod's Rare Shriekers, which can have huge hit points in the Delve Mines. So I think that this is looking like a really interesting curse that will find a niche as well. Sniper's Mark will be revealed later, and existing marks, all mark curses have been rebalanced to be more suitable for a single target. In addition, the curse penalty that is found on many bosses in the endgame no longer applies to marks at all. It applies to hexes instead. So marks apply to these bosses like the Shaper at full power. So this is just a total change of identity. Assassin's Mark, Warlord's Mark and the like, in the past, their use was to provide you with automatic charge generation, and also a little bit of some other bonuses as well, but primarily charge generation whilst you are killing weak enemies. Now they're just being redesigned, so they're going to be something that's effective against bosses. We'll just have to see how it plays out. I don't know. I also kind of expect that this means that the curse enemies with level 12 mark on hit rings, those mods will probably disappear entirely from the Shaper and Elder mod pool, but we'll have to see. I could be wrong on that. Other small changes, there have also been changes made to radius values, bonuses that certain curses give, and some additional quality stats, and these changes will be outlined in the patch notes. Sometimes these can be big news, and the patch notes will come out about 66 hours usually before the League launches, maybe a little bit later, maybe 63 hours before League launch. In addition to these changes, there'll be some passive tree adjustments and a new keystone that now changes how self-cast curses apply their debuffs. There's also a video that you can watch on GGG's YouTube channel, but I'm going to leave it there. There's a lot to take in on the curses, as well as just some little information as well. If you've got any comments or questions, definitely fire away below. Otherwise, I hope you have a good one. And I would also like to thank everyone that's a subscriber, because today I hit a milestone of 9,000 subscribers, which is definitely flattering that people find these videos useful enough to hang around and to watch them repeatedly. So thank you all, and I hope you have a good one.